All right, everyone. My name is Pascal Borel, and I'm not speaking to you from the Swiss mountains. I'm speaking to you from Geneva. Actually, I won't be speaking, I will be reading today. I will be reading the book I have written both in French and English. You will find it, of course, on Amazon, and it's titled 2024. The purpose of the book is to restore full strength to our democracies by rewriting the Constitution and giving you a roadmap so that you can reappropriate your full sovereignty in our democracies. You'll find the book on Amazon, but you will also find it on our website www.4ovet24.com. It is totally free of charge. All the text, everything is up there. And you will even have a comment section at the end of each and every chapter on the website, which is a totally free platform where you can express yourself the way you wish, the way you see fit, share your comment, your criticism, that I will definitely use as the driver of my personal growth and understanding of what you consider a constitution should be. Today, I'm reading probably I wouldn't call it the most important chapter, but the chapter which is of the essence of the book, which are the rules that should be followed in rewriting our constitutions, the very core values around which they should be written. So it's a long one. It's quite technical, but on the other hand, it is still understandable by a 7 to 10 years old child. And I wish to give him those values because they are at the core of the success of any civilization nowadays, despite the fact that you can call it a pact, a charter, or a constitution, which amounts to the same kind of thing anyway. So, here we go. Chapter 11 of 2024. The Constitution, or more like the constitutional articles. A few citations. The Constitution is above the law. The Constitution materializes our will to live together. The Constitution gives the sovereign, the people, the tools to exercise their power and their sovereignty. The Constitution defines the rules that grant us our freedoms and our obligations. In this chapter, you will find the constitutional articles that pragmatically summarize what must be implemented immediately to restore strength to our democracies. These articles are the application of the conclusions that you can draw from each of the topics covered in the various chapters of this book. While technical in nature, they should remain readable by a child aged 7 to 10 who should easily understand them. It is to that child that I now address myself. It is to that child that you, in turn, should speak when discussing these matters. This is my sole purpose, and it should be yours too. Unfortunately, I cannot hope to convince the most vulnerable among us, those who depend entirely on the environment that they have created to survive. Even if they intellectually agree with the essence of the argument, their dependence on the current system prevents them from acting. It would go against what gives them their quality of life, and no one should blame them for that. But for those who have decided to be courageous, for those who accept change as the universal rule of our universe, I would say this: just because you have spent a lot of time making the mistakes of the past does not mean you have to cling to them. You have lived your entire life with mistakes that you could not or did not know how to correct. But you can change. You can bequeath your children fairer, simpler, and more universal rules. If your courage is here, you can implement them right away. The results are guaranteed. It is simple, it is logical. Use your common sense as a guide. Trust yourself and let no one else influence you. You are at the center of the equation. You are the person who has the most impact on the outcome. On you depends the future of all communities. I make a decision. Each constitutional article below covers a specific sector of human activity, providing the rules that allow for harmony in our collaborative, responsible, and united communities. I have subdivided each article into amendments 1, 2, 3 to give coherence to the topic addressed. At the end of each article, you will find complementary explanations numbered according to the amendments uh, to which they refer. It might be a bit tedious, but this is the only way to not to over-complexify the constitutional article themselves. I estimated that this is the best way to explain the reason why each amendment is necessary. By the way, in the video, in the podcast, you will find complementary explanations directly after each and every article, because when verbally disclosed, it is easier for you not to refer to something I have said 10 minutes ago. So I will chain the article and the complementary explanation, disclosing it each time. Now, in the different articles, you may accuse me of being repetitive, but it is intentional. Each constitutional article and its amendments should be able to stand on their own without having to read the rest of the book. If you are shocked by the questioning implied by what I propose, I humbly ask you to read in the relevant chapters in full. This will permit you to understand the simple and relentless logic that has guided my thought process. Now, an anti-disclaimer. I have completed this work out of love for life, out of love for you, for human beings, with one goal: to give you a good life, an accomplished life. I have based it exclusively on my knowledge and my personal experiences. I have tested everything that I propose myself and in real life conditions. Otherwise, I would not even speak about it. I have received no external pressure or lobbying, received no financial aid. I am not paid, nor do I want to be. I am completely free from all external constraints. I have voluntarily detached myself from everything to hone my childlike logic, to defend your interests, to defend the interests of all human beings, to give you back your earth. The earth created life. Life belongs to the earth. I propose that we give it back. Here is how. Article 1. The first article of the Constitution defines the constituent rules. 1. 101 to 1001 constituent citizens, always an odd number, are chosen by lot every 2 years, 7 days before meeting in a constituent assembly. Additional explanation. The number of constituent citizens between 101 and 1001 may depend solely on the size of the population of the nation. The lottery is random. Article 2. The lottery is random and no one can avoid it or be represented. It is a civic duty. Only illness or disability can justify abstention and replacement. Article 3. No one, especially political leaders, is aware of the identity of those chosen by lot. Article 4. The constituent citizens are summoned for 48 hours, 2 days of work, in a closed session to review the Constitution. They make the necessary changes to defend the values and interests of the citizens of the nation. All debates are filmed and recorded, and they are publicly available 48 hours after the Constituent Assembly closes. Third-party oversight applies. Additional explanation. The time constraint, 7 days for the summons and then 48 hours to review and deliberate, is essential to prevent any lobbying. Article 5. The Constitution must fit within 6 to 12 A4 pages or 15,000 to 30,000 characters. A Constitution that exceeds 30,000 characters or approximately 12 A4 pages is unconstitutional, null and void. It must be reformulated. Additional explanations. The Constitution must be understandable by 99% of the population from the age of 7 to 10 years old and must be readable in less than 2 hours. Article 6. Constitutional amendments are voted on by an absolute majority of the 101 to 1001 constituent citizens, always an odd number. To ensure a majority emerges, abstention during the vote is prohibited, and no proportionality is allowed. Article 7. In the Constituent Assembly, if the Constituent Assembly proposes to reduce citizens' freedom or purchasing power, directly or indirectly, it submits its proposal for a new articles to a popular vote within 14 days of the end of the session. The people accept or reject it by an absolute majority. No proportionality is allowed. Additional explanation. The Constituent Assembly proposes what it deems fair and appropriate to defend citizens in their human, family, environmental, constitutional, legal, political, financial, strategic, and national environment. But in the case of a reduction in freedom or purchasing power, only the people decide. Eighth article. Amendments endorsed by the popular vote have constitutional force within 14 days. Ninth article. Amendments rejected by the people can only be reintroduced at the next Constituent Assembly. 10th article. The principle of third-party oversight applies. No later than 48 hours after the closure of the Constituent Assembly, i.e. 12 days before a potential popular vote, All debates held during the Constituent Assembly are publicly available without restriction. Additional explanation. The Constituent Assembly meets to serve the people. It deliberates on behalf of the citizens. When the debates are over, the people's third-party oversight principle fully applies, and all debates are publicly available without restriction. Third-party oversight principle is essential for 1. Holding the citizens chosen by lot accountable before all citizens of the nation. 2. Ensuring that each citizen can personally verify the correct functioning of the system for which they pay, a system which belongs to the citizens, which serves their interest, the interests of their community, and the interest of the nation at large. Article 11. Anyone found guilty directly or indirectly for obstructing or violating the constituent rules will be sentenced to 5 years of paid public service work without the possibility of appeal. Additional explanation. The penalty is not excessive because it must be sufficiently dissuasive to prevent any individual from violating the constitutional rules that provide the greatest number of people with their quality of life. The aim is to encourage the prevention of offenses through self-regulation by applying automatic penalties that are coercive enough to reduce the costs of the legal infrastructure. Second article of the Constitution. The second article of the Constitution defines the scope of the Constitution and the individual and collective responsibilities it implies. Article 1. Constitutional rules apply to all natural persons and all legal entities who live, stay, and or work on national soil. Article 2. No natural person, legal entity, governmental system, court, or legal rule can substitute for or create an exception to the application of the constitutional rules. Article 3. Respect for the Constitution is a personal civic responsibility. It is the responsibility of each individual by name, regardless of their social position, hierarchical position, or structure. Nothing and no one can substitute for this individual responsibility. Additional explanations. Any natural person or legal entity that pushes another man, human being to another, excuse me, any natural person or legal entity that pushes another human being to violate any constitutional article will be punished with sentences of public service work. If a subordinate is forced into an unconstitutional act, the entire chain of command from non-executive directors, executive directors, top bosses, to the subordinate receiving the order are all held responsible and will be punished with sentences of public service work without the possibility of appeal. In a chain of command, simply being informed that an unconstitutional act is required or has been committed by a subordinate places personal responsibility on all informed individuals, on all people in that chain of command. All are held responsible and will be punished with sentences of public service work without the possibility of appeal. Any natural person who uses their hierarchical position to impose an unconstitutional act on a subordinate will be immediately dismissed. They will no longer have the right to exchange any information or have any contact, whether verbally or in writing, through any media with their former employer. In the event of a violation of this rule, they will wear an electronic bracelet for 5 years, prohibiting them from approaching within 300 meters of their former employer's offices. In case of repeated violation, they will be sentenced to 5 years of paid public service work without the possibility of appeal. Monetary fines are not dissuasive for most large corporations. However, losing their commercial know-how by having to part with their employees, who will likely be recruited by their competitors, poses an existential threat. They will therefore implement a strict corporate culture and the necessary safeguards to protect themselves from constitutional violations. The aim is to encourage the prevention of offenses through self-regulation by applying automatic penalties to reduce the costs of the legal infrastructure that you pay for through your taxes and fees. Article 4. Any article of constitutional amendments that provides exceptions to its own application is null and void. It cannot be part of the Constitution. Additional explanation. If an article or constitutional amendment, even with good intentions, allows exceptions to what it proposes, allows for everything in its opposite, or can be applied or not, depending on political, financial, or other interests, it is null and void. It is unconstitutional. A rule is a rule. A right is a right. A duty is a duty. A law is a law. If there is an exception to the application of any constitutional rule, it is no longer a constitutional rule. It must be reformulated to restore its universal force or be deleted. No governments, no natural person, no legal entity, regardless of its legal form, no association, no human group can decide on the application or non-application or create an exception to the application of a constitutional article. Article 5. The Constitution does not contain any article or amendment that directly or indirectly transfers power from the people to government, to a government body, or any other structure, natural person or legal entity, regardless of its function or legal structure. Article 6. The Constitution is the tool intended for the citizens, for the people as a whole, to give them the instrument to exercise their sovereignty over political power, over the nation, over the laws. This includes the right to vote by universal suffrage, the right of referendum and popular initiative, the right of third-party oversight over the nation's accounts and the right of third-party oversight over the judiciary. Article 7. The Constitution defines the function of the state. It is the safeguard that protects the people from the state, that stops the government's takeover at the expense of the citizens, at the expense of the people as a whole, in all sectors of human activity that must be managed by professionals in their fields. Additional explanation. In 2024, governments are legal but illegitimate because they use the legal and constitutional framework to give themselves power at the expense of and without the approval of their sovereign, the people. The state disengages from all areas of activity where it is incompetent. Responsibilities are given back to professionals in their sector of activity. 8. The values of the constitutions of the Constitution are taught in all schools as soon as children can read and write. It is a subject in its own right that teaches the values that humans have chosen to live together in harmony, respecting each culture and the specificities inherent to all social groups that inhabit the planet, regardless of their origins. Third article of the Constitution. The third article of the Constitution defines the state budget. Article 1. For its operation, the state may take a maximum of 17% of the value generated by the work of all citizens and by the value generated by all economic actors of the nation, both individuals, natural person, and legal entities. Additional explanation. The Constitution grants purchasing power to the citizens and economic actors who create wealth, not to the politicians who administer the state. No private company dedicates more than 10% of its budget to administration. Money is allocated to research and development, distribution, product manufacturing, in short, to everything that generates value and, if possible, profit. No business management system allocates more than 10% of its turnover to administration, by definition a cost center, not a profit center. The same will apply to all nations and their governance systems. It is acknowledged that the role of the state exceeds the simple administrative framework. Hence, an allocation of 17% of the wealth or value creation produced by all economic actors of the nation. Second article. For individuals, the state tax at a maximum rate of 17% is applied to the sum of all income. Capital gains are not part of the taxable income. Article 3. For legal entities, regardless of their legal form, the state tax at a minimum rate of 17% is applied to the profits of the company. Capital gains are included in the profits and are also taxed by the state at a maximum rate of 17%. If the company has losses, the state may require an audit and constrain the company to pay up to 7% of its turnover as a solidarity tax for the use of the nation's infrastructure. Additional explanation. Companies, as legal entities, must not be able to avoid all forms of taxes by systematically showing losses year after year. The state can audit loss-making companies at any time and levy up to 7% of their turnover in the case of suspicion of fraudulent manipulation profits and losses. This procedure implicates the use of the judicial apparatus, and judges are the sole decision makers. The principle of third-party oversight applies. Therefore, the company can select between honestly paying 17% of its profit to the state or paying up to 7% of its total turnover if it tries to fraudulently manipulate its accounts, as the majority of companies do in 2024, let's face it, to minimize profit and therefore lower the tax bill over the state. The procedure implicates the use of the judicial apparatus, and judges are the sole decision makers. The principle of third-party oversight applies. The company, as a legal entity, knows that if it enters this procedure, all the documents it must provide to the judges to evaluate its financial situation will be made publicly accessible. Article 4. All forms of taxes, formerly direct, indirect, inheritance, wealth taxes, and inflation, cannot exceed in total a maximum of 17% of what is produced by all economic actors of the nation, both individuals, natural persons, and legal entities. Additional explanation. Whether you understand it or not, inflation is a tax. It is part of the 17% that the state takes from you, of what you pay to the state as your social contribution. If inflation or the increase in the money supply exceeds the nation's economic growth in percentage term over a 12-month period, this percentage excess is automatically deducted from the 17% tax that you owe the state. Simple, effective, and fair. All indirect taxes disappear in favor of a single 17% tax, so that the state can eliminate the cost of tax collection, which is often as high or even higher in some cases than what it brings to the state. And it can eliminate state bureaucracy and thus improve its profitability from the amounts paid by the taxpayer. The goal is to facilitate, simplify, and promote economic exchanges by eliminating the time wasted on paperwork by citizens, businesses, and all the taxpayers. No one will waste their time complying with the current complexity of tax collection, since the new system is the same for everyone. The goal is to give back to businesses and individuals the time that they spend on unnecessary and counterproductive administrative hassles and procedures imposed upon them. The goal is to eliminate favoritism, corruption, and tax breaks between states and economic actors, individuals, and legal entities, since everyone, without exception, regardless of their legal form, will be subjected to a uniform, unavoidable 17% tax. Everyone will once again be equal before the law, before taxation, and before the value of money, as we will see in a second, which is the only way to give a future to our human civilizations. All indirect taxes disappear: VAT, CO2, energy, alcohol, tobacco, whichever. The market becomes efficient again in all areas, and all citizens have access to goods and services at their real price. Citizens, once again, have access to a true market economy to build their businesses, build their families, build whatever they wish. Whatever they wish. The state gives all economic actors fiscal, legal, and constitutional stability and equality. This provides these economic actors such an advantage, such a simplification of governance compared to the system of laws and taxation that most nations possess in 2024, that those economic actors will all want to elect domicile in that state. In fact, they will have no choice but to elect domiciled in that state if they wish to remain at their competitive best. Article 5. In the event of a crisis, the state may propose to the citizens to increase its revenue from 17% to a maximum of 20% of the wealth produced by all economic actors of the nation, both individual, brackets natural persons, and legal entities. This proposal to increase state revenues is subject to a popular ballot, decision based on the absolute majority, i.e., the majority of the total number of citizens voting within a nation. The people decide. Additional explanations. Crises are defined as all situations that directly threaten the nation's existence, namely wars, pandemics, social chaos, the inability to ensure internal order, and the inability to uphold justice. Article 6. The cost of the legislative apparatus, including police and prison services, are covered by the 17% tax collected by the state. If additional budgets are required, they are subject to a popular vote that accepts or rejects them by absolute majority without any proportionality. The people decide. Article 7. The costs of maintenance of roads, railways, water supply, electricity supply, sewage systems, and other infrastructures are covered by the 17% tax collected by the state. If additional budgets are required for the construction of new infrastructures, they are subject to a popular vote that accepts or rejects them by absolute majority without any proportionality. The people decide. The military budget is covered by the 17% tax collected by the state. If additional budgets are required for the construction of new infrastructures or the acquisition of essential equipment, they are subjected to a popular vote that accepts or rejects them by absolute majority without any proportionality. The people decide. Additional explanation. The people directly decide by universal suffrage without proportionality on any increase in the state budget in any area. The state has 17% of the nation's value production as an operating budget. If it is forced to exceed this, whatever the reason, the people decide. Article 9. On January 31st of each year, the state provides public access to its financial statements. The following information is made available to the public: the costs and value of the entire state system, the costs of the entire legislative apparatus, the costs of the entire law enforcement apparatus, the costs of the prison system, the costs of military systems, the itemized estimated value of all infrastructures, the itemized estimated value of all direct and indirect state possessions, itemized as a whole and in detail, the estimated value of all infrastructures and military equipment as a whole, the maintenance costs of infrastructures, including buildings and equipment in their entirety and in detail, all salary costs as a whole and in detail, and the costs of all state or private sector service providers, namely, without exception, as a whole and in detail. Additional explanation. The state serves its sovereign, the people. The state belongs to the citizens. The principle of third-party oversight applies, and the citizens have full transparency and access to the accounts of what is paid by the citizens, of what belongs to the citizens. Article 10. If the politicians, as administrators of the nation, exceed 18% tax revenue from the value generated by all economic actors of the nation, both individual, natural persons, and legal entities, they are immediately dismissed, regardless of their hierarchical rank, function, or seniority, without any severance pay and with lifetime ineligibility. They are permanently banned from public service and returned to the private sector employment market. Additional explanation. In case of budget overruns, politicians are considered poor managers of the democracy of which they are in charge. They are not capable of respecting and applying constitutional rules. They are dismissed just like a bad non-executive director when they do not comply with the statutes of the company that they manage. The sanction is harsh, but it is essential. No one wants undisciplined, incompetent at the helm of the nation. When this is the case, they must be eliminated, they must be removed from the role they failed to fulfill, to allow others to have a chance to do better. Politicians and public account managers are intelligent and highly qualified individuals. If they know that they will lose their employment instantly if involved in budget overruns or falsifications of state accounts, they will self regulate and apply financial discipline that will ensure that they retain their employment, their livelihood. The goal is to facilitate the prevention of crimes via self regulation by applying automatic penalties to simplify and reduce the costs of the legal infrastructure that you pay for with your taxes. Any individual involved in concealing, falsifying, or misleading the public concerning the state's accounts will be dismissed with immediate effect without severance pay, regardless of their function, seniority, or hierarchical rank. They will be permanently banned from public service and sentenced to 5 years of paid public service work without the possibility of appeal. For further detailed explanation, refer, please, to Chapter 7, Sources of State Revenue, and to Chapter 8, Political Leader. Article 4 of the Constitution. The fourth article of the Constitution imposes a single tax of 17% on all citizens and all economic actors, both natural person and legal entities, and a mandatory individual solidarity savings, MISS, MISS, of 23%, specifically 9% for health, 9% for education, and 5% for retirement. First article. All citizens have the constitutional obligation to pay a single tax of 17% to the state on the total income generated by their activities. Additional explanation. The single tax of 17% restores citizens' pride in their social contribution rather than forcing them to defraud the tax authorities and or to circumvent the laws to evade the institutionalized theft organized by the states in 2024. Tax havens will no longer be necessary and will naturally disappear. Fiduciaries, accountants, and other state employees serving the complex and costly rules of taxation are returned to the job market. They become profit centers once again, working for something useful instead of wasting their time complying with the complexity of an inefficient and obsolete system. In fact, it gives them back their life. Article 2. All citizens have the constitutional obligation to save from their first salary and on the total income generated by all their activities throughout their lives 23%, specifically 9% for their health, 9% for their children's education, and 5% for their retirement. Additional explanation. The citizen take back their responsibilities, regain their dignity, and are no longer assisted and dependent on state services. The state social security system disappears in favor of mandatory individual solidarity savings, MIS. Companies regain their straightforward and direct relationship to their employees. They offer better wages generated by the time and money that has been saved by eliminating the old system controlled by the state. Companies, unions, and states stop wasting their time in endless negotiations and abolish the endless complexity that is imposed by the system purely to protect their own interests and justify their existence. The state provides all citizens, all economic actors of the nation with a straightforward system of management of their health, education, retirement, and unemployment. Such a system represents huge advantage, but such an advantage that all responsible human beings will want to domicile that nation. It's an absolute win-win deal. You'll see it in a sec. Third article. It is a mandatory individual solidarity saving, MISS, non-taxable, exempt from inheritance tax or any other tax. Article 4. The mandatory individual solidarity savings, MES, remains the property of the citizens at all times, deposited in their name on 3 separate escrow accounts, specifically a health account, an education account, and a retirement account. Article 5. The citizens themselves select the financial institutions that manage their mandatory individual solidarity savings, MES. Article 6. The mandatory individual solidarity savings, MES, can only be used for the following purposes. 1. Medical care provided by healthcare professionals. 2. Education of children and students provided by educational professionals. 3. To pay the pension after reaching the retirement age. Additional explanation. Health is an individual responsibility. Citizens regain their direct relationship with their doctor. They choose their doctors freely and the medical care that they need. They pay for health care directly from their savings without any state intervention. Health insurance is not mandatory. It is an option available to the citizen. If they prefer it to the mandatory individual solidarity savings. Yes. Local solidarity funds contribute when necessary to the care of the most disadvantaged. School is mandatory for children up to 14 or 16 years old, depending on the jurisdiction. Choice of school is a parental choice paid for directly by the parents. Schools and universities compete with each other. Education professionals determine the most appropriate programs for the success of their students and the price of education services. Article 7. The total mandatory individual solidarity savings, MES, can be used up to a maximum amount of 24% to pay for a period of unemployment for 12 months. Upon resumption of gainful activity, the total amount used must be repaid over a maximum period of 4 years to the mandatory individual solidarity savings (MES). In case of non-repayment, the individual will be sentenced to pay public service work until full repayment. Additional explanation. Unemployment insurance disappears, replaced by the option to use up to a maximum of 24% of the total amount of mandatory individual solidarity savings (MES) over a period of 12 months. It is fully repaid by those who need it upon resumption of activity to ensure that this safety net remains available throughout life. Article 8. When a citizen dies and any unused health savings (MES H for health) are transferable at 83% in direct line equally among all the citizens' descendants, the amount is compulsorily allocated to their health saving account. The remaining 17% is allocated to a solidarity fund which is managed by local communities and under no circumstances by the state. Unused education savings (MISSE) for children's schooling and studies are allocated 50% to the parents as a supplement to retirement at the legal retirement age according to the jurisdiction. At the parent's death, the remaining 50% of the education savings are transferable at 83% in direct line equally among all descendants. The amount is compulsorily allocated to their education savings. The remaining 17% is allocated to a solidarity fund managed by local communities and under no circumstances by the state. In case of no descendant, the remaining 50% is allocated to a solidarity fund managed by local communities and under no circumstances by the state. The use of mandatory individual solidarity savings for any purpose other than health, education, retirement, and unemployment is a criminal offense. Penalties for offenders are severe and carried out through public service work without the possibility of appeal. Article 11. When the citizen dies without descendants, the remaining amounts in the mandatory individual solidarity saving are allocated to a solidarity fund managed by local communities and under no circumstances by the state. This money is used exclusively to provide and improve care facilities for the most disadvantaged, the sick, or those in retirement homes. Article 5 of the Constitution. The fifth article of the Constitution gives citizens the right to retain 60% of the value generated by their work. The citizen has the constitutional right to retain 60% of their value creation on an annual basis. These 60% constitute their immediate purchasing power, which they can retain and use for themselves outside of any external constraints other than their personal will. Additional explanation. The citizen regained their purchasing power, reviving the real economy. The citizen regained the pride of their social contribution. They participate voluntarily, and so we avoid the mobilization of the useless and costly legal framework. The legal framework can then focus on repressing real criminality rather than that generated and fabricated by inapplicable laws so essential to permit today's institutionalized theft by the states. Tax havens disappear. They are no longer necessary because the institutionalized theft by the states no longer exists. Article 2. The citizen has the constitutional right to retain 83% of their value creation in their name. The mandatory individual solidarity savings (MES) remains their property at all time. Article 3. The sum of the mandatory individual solidarity saving (MES), health, education, and retirement, as well as all forms of taxes combined, including inflation, cannot exceed a total of 40% of the citizen's income. Additional explanations. Inflation is part of the state's single 17% tax. If the money supply increases beyond the percentage of national growth on an annual basis, this excess is deducted from the 17% state tax paid by all citizens. Simple. Article 6 of the Constitution. The sixth article of the Constitution guarantees freedom of expression in all its form. 1. Article 1. Freedom of expression is a universal right that applies to all individuals, both natural persons and legal entities, without any restriction. Additional explanation. The ability to communicate via language, writing, and images, regardless of the language or the medium, is the driver of the success of the human species. It is what gives us our competitive advantage and differentiates us from all other living species on Earth, enabling our collaborative capacity. No law, nothing, and no one can alienate or restrict the driver of the human species' success: communication in all its forms. Article 2. Censorship in any form is prohibited. Additional explanation. Any individual or legal entity can express their opinion, disseminate it, and share their story at any time without censorship, without restriction, regardless of the media that is used. Article 3. No criminal penalty applies to the exercise of freedom of expression. Article 4. Incitement to crime, incitement to violence, incitement to hatred is prohibited. The nation's jurisdiction applies, and judges are the only ones authorized to decide. The third-party oversight principle applies. Article 5. Copyright, patents, intellectual property, and the disclosure of trade secrets are subjected to the jurisdiction of the nation. Judges are the only one authorized to decide. The third-party oversight principle applies. Article 6. The disclosure of classified documents or secret communications, regardless of their content or nature, is only criminal if it endangers the existence of the nation as a whole, if it only harms a group of individuals, any legal entities, government agencies, associations, ethnic or religious groups, without jeopardizing the nation as a whole, no criminal penalty can be imposed on the entity responsible for the disclosure. Judges and jurors are the only one authorized to decide. The third-party oversight principle applies. Article 7. If the disclosure of information of any kind from any source on any subject allows citizens to have a more complete understanding of their environment and allows citizens to form an opinion on a situation based on facts, no criminal penalty can be imposed on the entity responsible for the disclosure. Judges and jurors are the only one authorized to decide. The third-party oversight principle applies. Denunciation, defamation, insults, harassment, and lying do not constitute an infringement of freedom of expression. They can only be brought before a criminal court if they endanger the existence of the nation as a whole, or if it is proven that they were done with the deliberate and repeated intention to harm, misinform, or manipulate citizens by preventing them from forming an opinion based on facts. Judges and jurors are the only one authorized to decide. The third-party oversight principle applies. Additional explanation. Denunciation, defamation, insults, harassment, and lying can be condemned if they threaten the existence of the nation as a whole, but they are too vague and indefinable to constitute a limitation on freedom of expression. Denunciation, defamation, insults, harassment, and lying are part of everyday life. The only way to avoid being affected by them is to be regularly exposed to them, to recognize, manage, and eliminate them. This is similar to the principle of vaccination, which aims to expose oneself to viruses in order to become immune, to become stronger, and to experience no symptoms in case of exposure. If you seek to hide behind legal or constitutional rules to justify and maintain your inability to manage the verbal transgressions that are directed at you, you will deprive your community of sincere and direct communication, which admittedly can sometimes be difficult to hear. Doing so, you will deprive us of our freedoms. You will forbid us from thinking freely. You will prevent us from expressing ourselves freely and honestly, and you will also confirm your own fragility. Humans are the dominant species on the planet. You cannot let the most fragile among us deprive you of your freedom of expression. In simple terms, if you think it, you have the right to say it. No law can forbid you from expressing your deepest, most secret thoughts out loud and intelligibly if you so wish, whatever the nature of the statements. Article 9. Any individual in a hierarchical position who imposes censorship or restricts freedom of expression on a subordinate commits an unconstitutional act. They are immediately dismissed and are forbidden to exchange any information or have any contact, whether physically, verbally, or in writing, using any media with their former employer for a period of 5 years. In case of violation of this rule, they must wear an electronic bracelet that prohibits them from approaching within 300 meters of their former employer's offices. In case of repeated violations, the 5-year ban on any contact with their former employer is commuted into a 5-year sentence of paid public service work without the possibility of appeal. Additional explanation. The goal is to encourage the prevention of crimes by applying automatic penalties so coercive that they will impose a self-regulation by default. This will reduce the costs of the legal infrastructure for which you pay with your taxes. It is easy to understand that large industrial companies, big tech, or others are not afraid of financial penalties, regardless of the size of the fine. However, they sign their death warrant if the conviction requires them to lose their own know-how, their skills, their operational secrets, by losing their employees who will instantly be available to their competitors. Article 7th of the Constitution. The 7th article of the Constitution prohibits the state from having any financial involvement in the healthcare sector. Article 1. States and public institutions are formally prohibited from subsidizing healthcare systems directly or indirectly. Article 2. Hospitals and establishments active in the field of healthcare are formally prohibited from receiving any funding from public or state sources directly or indirectly. Additional explanations. Medicine is not the domain of the state. The state has no specific competence in the healthcare sector and should have absolutely no involvement in the sector. Article 3. All professional healthcare actors are in competition with one another and are free to choose all medical treatments and services and the price thereof. Additional explanation. Medicine should be given back to doctors. No one should be able to dictate or influence the medical professionals in their choice of treatments and their pricing. Patients should be able to select the services they consume based upon their free choice and the cost-effectiveness ratio. Only unimpeded competition among the various medical providers can offer a healthy environment in which the patient pays the right price for the right treatment. Article 4. Hospitals, establishment active in the field of healthcare, and self-employed doctors must be fully financially independent. They must establish a transparent table of tariffs that include the costs of all types of care, infrastructure costs, hospital accommodation, doctors' salaries, nursing staff, and administrative staff salaries. Additional explanation. We all need medical care at some point, and when that happens, we are willing to pay the price for the best possible treatment. It is a sector fundamental to our existence and should remain free from the constraints of intermediaries like the states or the mandatory health insurance companies, and must once again be placed at the heart of our human and economic universe. The good intentions behind state or private collective mandatory health insurance systems prevent health professionals from maintaining control over medicine, even though they are the only ones fully qualified to select the care that is provided to patients and to determine the costs thereof. States, social security, the pharmaceutical industry, and mandatory health insurance companies are strictly prohibited from imposing or exerting any pressure or lobbying based on administrative, political, or financial imperatives. Doctors and healthcare professionals must freely choose the medical treatments and medication that their patients will receive with a clear conscience and without any constraints other than those imposed by their medical knowledge and the Hippocratic Oath. The inefficiency of state procedures, coupled with the complexity of the insurance company's regulations, has become so convoluted that for every practicing doctor, there are 5 to 7 people dealing with the administration. These 5 to 7 administrators per doctor are all salaried, and they alone triple the cost of the healthcare system. In other words, the administration element that we have today in the healthcare industry actually costs us more than the total cost of medicine and its treatments. If organizations active in the healthcare sector cannot achieve financial balance, they go bankrupt and are replaced by others. Political interests and the associated cronyism cannot, under any circumstances, be employed to save the bad managers at the expense of the good managers, or bad doctors at the expense of good doctors. Article 5. The state and public institutions are prohibited from financing scientific research in the medical field. Additional explanation. Scientific research in the medical field should only be financed by private funds, independent local communities, private associations, private donors, and all actors active in the pharmaceutical sector. Laboratories and research institutes that benefit from this funding must publish once a year an exhaustive and nominative list of the sources of funding and of the amounts that they have received. The principle of third-party oversight applies. The financial statements to prevent corruption and to lend credibility to the result of research, which will no longer and should no longer secretly preserve purely the interests of those who have financed that research. Article 6. If a state employed individual directly or indirectly exert any influence on the choice of treatment on the price of whichever medical protocol or treatment determined by healthcare professionals, or exert any influence on any actors active in the healthcare sector, namely pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, clinics, and self-employed doctors, the state-employed individual is immediately dismissed without compensation, barred from public service for life, and sentenced to community service work without the possibility of appeal. Additional explanation. The goal is to prevent problems before they arise. Only self-regulation through simple but coercive rules can hold individuals accountable. Article 7. All actors active in the healthcare sector, the pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, clinics, and self-employed doctors must publish their financial statement annually in full transparency, accessible to the public. The financial statement should include the names of the owners, the name of the shareholders, the name of all board of directors with their full profile, the name of all executive directors with their full profile, the total capital value or the estimated value of 100% of the shares if not publicly traded, turnover, origin of all sources of income, anonymized, of course, for individual patients, nominative in all other cases without exception, all salary expenses, all expenses related to all service providers, nominatively estimated, nominatively, estimated value of all infrastructure, premises, building, laboratories, technical equipment, profits, losses, and profit margins, financial reserves. Additional explanation. The publication of financial statements by all the actors working in the healthcare industry is essential because the principle of third-party oversight is the only way to return medicine to the service of human beings rather than to the service of financial interests. Pharmaceutical companies, health insurance companies, and professional investors with shareholding in hospital groups or any other medical infrastructures are subject to this requirement. When doctors earn a good living, they should be proud of this. They serve their patients. They save lives. There is no shame in being transparent and displaying the income they derive from their essential role for all human beings. On the other hand, those who are too ashamed of the dishonest ways in which they generate their earnings may not wish to disclose their financial statements. They are obliged to prevent you from understanding so that you cannot impose new rules upon them that serve your interest, that serve the citizens, the people, and the nation. To protect their profits, they must keep their financial statements opaque. They rely upon omerta, just like in the mafia. This particularly applies to the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies who exert a maximum amount of lobbying on politicians and indirectly on the legal framework to hide their financial machinations and the ridiculous profits they derive therefrom. Without mandatory third party oversight, they will never ever be at your service. Their priority will always remain profit margins and how to squeeze the lemon dry. Financial transparency is your only choice. It is only this that can truly rebuild trust between all actors in the healthcare industry, in particular, trust between doctors and their patients. Patients will at last know how much they are paying and for what they are paying exactly. In your new model, there are no financial intermediaries. You see all the prices and you see whether profit margins are acceptable or not. If you do not demand full healthcare sector financial statements transparency, there will never be harmony between the various actors in the medical service industry. The same logic applies to the topic of education. The choice is yours. Either you act it, or the parasites who profit from your inaction will continue to rob you. Omerta, dissimulation, and dishonesty will remain the rule. You will be taken advantage of until your last day on this earth. Eighth article of the Constitution. The eighth article of the Constitution prohibits the state any financial involvement in the field of education. Article 1. School is compulsory from age 4 or 6 to 14 or 16, depending on the jurisdictions. Article 2. Parents freely choose the education professionals responsible for teaching their children, according to what they believe is best suited to their needs, paying them directly with the help of the mandatory independent solidarity saving education, MISSE. Article 3. The state is formally prohibited from intervening in the direct relationship between parents, children, and education professionals by imposing itself as a financial intermediary or imposing any program or subject. Additional explanation. Education is a parental responsibility. It belongs to the parents with the support of professional educators. You must return education to parents and professional teachers, just as healthcare must be returned to doctors. Article 4. The state is formally prohibited from subsidizing educational systems directly or indirectly, whether for school, educational institutions, or universities. Additional explanation. The prohibition of state funding may seem shocking because you are accustomed to the idea of state subsidized education and cost sharing among taxpayers. It was a good model. You lived it and you understood its limit. In 2024, it is far too expensive and no longer fulfills its educational mission. You must restructure it for the following reason. It permits parents to remain responsible for their children's education. It eliminates a state and therefore political bias in determining educational programs. It eliminates the standardization of programs for everyone, which is a leveling down. It reduces costs by eliminating state management and its administrative inefficiency. It allows education professionals to determine the content of all programs. It allows healthy and stimulating competition among educational institutions and universities. It allows healthy and stimulating competition among education professionals. Education professionals are no longer state employees. It allows parents to select the school best suited to their children. It allows parents to invest more in education based on the child's potential. It allows parents to know the real cost of their children's education. Article 5. The state is formally prohibited from imposing or exerting any influence on education professionals who are the sole decision makers regarding the content of educational programs and the pace applied to achieve the best results with students. Article 6. Education professionals select the educational programs and the pace of teaching in good conscience, based on what they believe is in the best interest of students and based on the specifics of their institutions, without any external pressure, whether administrative, political, or financial. Additional explanation. It is unacceptable for states to select and impose the standardized programs on professional teachers and their students based on administrative, political, and financial criteria. It is not even the case that states, politicians, and their officials are useless in the education sector. They are, in fact, non existent because they never practice. They never teach directly to students. They theorize and discuss, but they are not in daily physical contact. They are disconnected. The only way to become good at anything is through practice, through action. The only way to learn is through action, not words. All employees of state education departments must be made available to the labor market in the education sector if that is indeed their vocation. To regain their usefulness, they must teach, not manage paperwork. They will regain the pride of serving humanity's most useful, necessary, and noble cause, educating the young. Teaching without constraints, led by professionals, will finally regain its originality, its diversity, its vocation, allowing students to think freely, to think differently if they wish, and education will allow talents and new ideas to flourish from an early age. Teachers and professors will once again become men and women driven by their vocation for teaching, rather than being mercenaries in the service of the state, as is the case today. Article 7. Schools, educational institutions, and universities must find their own economic well-being and financial balance. They are formally prohibited from receiving any funding from public or state sources directly or indirectly. They compete with each other concerning the content of the educational programs, the cost of education, and the nature of university research. Additional explanation. The good intention behind the mandatory state education system prevents education professionals from controlling the cost of education, even though they are the only ones truly qualified not only to choose the programs of the subjects taught, but also to determine the cost of their teaching and, therefore, the prices parents must pay. If certain schools or specific programs and teaching are more expensive than others, it is up to the parents to decide whether their children are capable of following them and whether they want to make that investment. If schools and universities do not find their financial balance, they go bankrupt and are replaced by others. Neither the state nor any public fund can save bad educational institutions and the expense at the expense of good ones. In any sector of human activity, the disappearance of the less adapted in favor of the more efficient is part of the healthy and natural evolution of things, just as death allows rebirth. You should not fear it because it is good. It is the driver of evolution towards betterment. Survival of the fittest means the survival of the strongest or the predominance of the most adapted or priority to the one who best fulfills its function. Article 8. If a state-employed individual directly or indirectly exert any influence on the content or the cost of teaching programs determined by education professionals in any school, educational institution, or university, the individual is immediately dismissed without compensation, barred from public service for life, and sentenced to community service work without the possibility of appeal. Article 8A. Schools, educational institutions, and universities may receive private funding. 8B. If a private sector or individual involved in the funding of any school, educational institution, or university directly or through their employer exerts pressure or seeks to influence the content or cost of the teaching programs determined by education professionals, the individual is immediately dismissed regardless of their rank, role, or function. They are prohibited from exchanging any information or having contact, whether physically, verbally, or in writing, with their former employer for a period of 5 years. If it is proven that the individual violated the rule during this period, they will be required to wear an electronic tag that prohibits them from approaching within 300 meters of their former employer's office. In the case of repeated offense, the 5-year ban on all contact with their former employer is automatically increased to a 5-year sentence of paid community service work without the possibility of appeal. Article 9. Homeschooling is an absolute constitutional right. Parents organize homeschooling in collaboration with education professionals who administer mandatory exams to students twice a year to monitor their progress. If it is established that the children do not meet the required level, education professionals may impose school-based remediation 12 months after notification. Parents retain the right to select the school. Additional explanation. The goal is to prevent problems before they arise. Only self-regulation through simple but coercive rules can hold individuals accountable, who would, otherwise, if they find a personal advantage, find ways to circumvent the Constitution and the laws. Wise people do not need laws to behave responsibly. Others will circumvent the laws. Most of us only adapt to our environment without considering the long-term consequences, to make the most of it immediately for ourselves, not for others. No one is to blame. Nature has programmed us for this, and it is good this way. It is easy to understand that large industrial companies, big techs, and especially governments want to control the knowledge that schools and universities put into students' heads. They ensure that the lies that bring them the most are at the heart of educational programs. They ensure that teachers have no choice but to relay their lies, because otherwise the university or school loses its funding. It is normal for companies with this lobbying leverage over universities to use it to protect their own financial interests. However, if individuals who implement this blackmail are condemned to lose their jobs when caught and are no longer allowed to work for the company and the hierarchy that mandates them, they will no longer take the risk. Better yet, large companies, whatever they may be, sign their death warrants if the rules require them to lose their most important employees in the case of violations, therefore losing their know-how, their skills, and their trade secrets. These lost employees immediately find themselves on the job market, available to their competition. It is a transfer of knowledge that no company can afford. Easy. QED. Actually, how is it that you did not think of this? Why did you not propose it? Are you afraid of rethinking the system? Are you afraid of a solution that costs nothing? Are you afraid of a solution whose results are guaranteed? Are you afraid of success? Or is it just your lack of courage? Or is it your lack of commitment? You only can answer those questions. Back to the constitutional articles. Article 10. All actors active in the education sector, including schools, educational institutions, and universities, must spontaneously publish their financial statements annually by January 31st in full transparency, accessible to all. The following must be disclosed: the names, the owners, the names of the shareholders, the name of all board of directors with their full profile, the name of all executive directors with their full profiles, the total capital value or the estimated value of 100% of the shares if not publicly traded, the turnover, the origin of all income sources with names, the names of all donors and advertisers, all salary expenses, all expenses related to all service providers, the value of the infrastructure, the profits, the losses, the profit margins, the financial reserves. Additional explanation. Over 2 centuries, states have stolen your children's education. You have two options to take it back. You can homeschool if you have the time, capacity, and will. It is the best choice because you take full responsibility for education. No law, no lobbying. No one can take away this family choice, this freedom of responsible parents. Or you give your children to true education professionals without state constraints. You have a direct relationship with them and you pay them directly through your mandatory individual solidarity savings education, Miss E. You are free to change schools if you believe your children will progress better or faster in another institution. You remain in charge of education. You are a true father. You are a true mother. You are a true family. There is no other alternative if you want to give your children a future to your culture, a future to your nation, a future to your civilization, and a future to the values which your descendants will in turn educate your grandchildren. Article 11. All actors active in the education sector, including schools, educational institutions, and universities, must publish their corporate status annually in full transparency, accessible to all. Additional explanation. The principle of third-party oversight obviously applies to education. Schools and universities are proud to publish their financial statements, proving their full and entire usefulness to human communities. Individuals who seek to use the education system for personal enrichment are black sheep, and as such should be eliminated. The publication of the financial statements of all actors working in the education sector is essential to avoid corruption, lobbying, and especially to bring transparency, which is the only way to rebuild the trust of parents who pay directly for their children's education through their mandatory individual solidarity savings education. Miss E. Article 9 of the Constitution. The ninth article of the Constitution sets out the rules for all actors involved in the sector of press, media, and more broadly, public information. Article 1. The state is strictly prohibited from subsidizing any actors involved in the press, media, and more broadly, public information, as they are all considered an integral part of the educational system at the adult stage of the citizen's life. Article 2. All actors involved in the press, media, and more broadly public information must find their own economic rationale and financial balance. They are strictly prohibited from receiving any funding or public or state origin, of public or state origin, directly or indirectly. 3. All actors involved in the press, media, and more broadly public information compete with one another, both in terms of the quality and accuracy of the information and the prices of their service. Additional explanation. Those who tell the stories control societies. Therefore, you must protect journalists and, more broadly, all actors involved in the press, media, and public information, both individuals and legal entities, through constitutional rules that restore the platform necessary for their freedom of expression without constraint, for their intellectual honesty in complete independence, and for their unrestricted freedom of analysis. The will of the people, of the citizens, but in fact of you alone through your individual action, can restore to journalists their profession, their vocation, their pride, their role in serving the truth, in serving information, and in serving you. Journalism to journalists. It is simple, easy to understand, and easy to implement if it is truly the will of the people. But this will only come from you. This will only come from the people because control of the narrative is so vital, so essential, that today the powers that wish to forbid all and any possibility of giving the media back to the media dominate. So it is your duty to do this, to offer it as a gift to the entire press, and in particular to the true journalists. Institutions that inform the public have an educational responsibility. Their role is to allow citizens to educate themselves by accessing reliable and verified information, whatever are the constraints of political and financial interests of the moment. Citizens have the right to reliable information. It is on this basis that they can form opinions, make necessary judgments, and vote according to their personal convictions in their interests, in the interest of their children, and in the interest of their broader environment. If actors involved in the press, media, and public information do not find their financial rationale, then they will go bankrupt and will be replaced by others. Political interests and the associated cronyism cannot save bad managers at the expense of good ones, or bad journalists at the expense of good ones. Excuse me. In any human activity, the disappearance of the less adapted in favor of the most efficient is part of a healthy and natural evolution, just as death allows for rebirth. You must not fear it because it is necessary. It is the driver of evolution towards better, towards stronger, and towards more efficient systems. Article 4. If any information disseminated by an actor in the press, media, and more broadly public information is found to be false a day, a week, a month, a year, or 10 years after its publication, the media must within 10 days dedicate an equivalent space or airtime to the correction of the or erratum as was dedicated to the initial falsehood. Additional explanation. If a media outlet headlines for 3 days with information that turns out to be inaccurate, within 10 days, it must dedicate its headline for 3 days to the correction. It can no longer get away with a two-line erratum hidden on page 24 that goes completely unnoticed and unread. If a media outlet dedicates 3 hours of airtime in prime time, 3 days in a row, to broadcasting information that turns out to be inaccurate, within 10 days, it must dedicate 3 hours of airtime in the same prime time period, 3 days in a row, to the correction. This is the only way to hold the media accountable. If they must dedicate vital time and space to correcting their own errors, they will avoid making them in the first place. They will avoid prioritizing political interests and prioritizing influences from any source because it will cost them dearly in credibility, but above all, in financial terms. This will directly affect their profitability and quickly drive them to bankruptcy if they do not self-discipline. This is precisely what you want. Self-regulation is the only way to hold the media accountable. They must voluntarily apply the rules that protect their public. Only a change in the constitutional environment that applies to all employees, to all individuals, can change the corporate culture of the media in general. Article 5. Any failure to comply with Article 4 is punishable by 30 days of public service work for all individuals who were aware or who through negligence allowed false, unchecked, or misleading information to be disseminated to the public, regardless of their role or hierarchical position, including the entire editorial chain. Additional explanation. The goal is to propose rules that hold individuals accountable even before the offenses are committed. Article 6. Any individual, regardless of roles or hierarchical position, employed or subsidized directly or indirectly by the state, who exerts pressure on the editorial line or content of any actor involved in the press, media, and more broadly public information, will be dismissed immediately without compensation and banned from public service for life without the possibility of appeal. Article 7. Any legal entity, including governments and states, that exerts directly or indirectly pressure on the editorial line or the content of any actor involved in the press, media, and more broadly public information, is obliged to dismiss all individuals, including the chain of command, involved in the process immediately, regardless of hierarchical position, without compensation. If they come from a government structure, they are banned from public service for life. If they come from the private sector, they are prohibited from exchanging any information or having any contact, whether physically, verbally, or in writing, through any media with their former employer for a period of 5 years. In case of a breach of this rule, they must wear an electronic bracelet that prevents them from approaching within 300 meters of their former employer's offices. In case of repeated offenses, the 5-year prohibition on contact with their former employer is commuted to a 5-year sentence of paid public service work without the possibility of appeal. Additional explanation. Journalism to journalists. For full integrity of information to citizens, journalists must be able to work free from state's pressures and influences, free from shareholders, free from advertisers, and free from other financial constraints. The only method that can guarantee the independence of journalists and the media is to prevent any attempt of corruption in advance by imposing severe sanctions on any individual, any legal entity or organization that, directly or indirectly, transgresses the very principle of freedom of the press. Article 8A. As soon, no, that's not an article, that's complementary explanation. Would you please excuse me? As long as the media does not publish their sources of revenues, they are not credible, they have no credibility whatsoever, because those who pay them dictate the maneuver. Article 8. All actors involved in the press, media, and more broadly public information must voluntarily publish their accounts, financial statements, once a year on January 31st in full transparency, accessible to all. The following must be available: the owners by name, the shareholders by name, the capital value, i.e. the value of 100% of the shares at market price or estimated value when not publicly traded, the value of infrastructures, the turnover, the specific sources of all revenues, the names and amount received from all donors and advertisers, all salary expenses, all service providers' expenses with names, profits, losses, and financial reserves. Additional explanation. As long as the media does not publish their source of revenues, they have no credibility whatsoever, because those who pay them control them. If the revenue sources, the media's turnover, mainly come from the state or a few industry magnates, as is the case in 2024, they are at their service. Neither you nor anyone else can blame them for this. It is normal. As an employee, you obey the person who pays you. Otherwise, you will lose your job. It is easy for you to understand that the same pattern applies between the media and their sources of funding or their owners. They obey those who pay them. Making public their sources of revenue finally allows you to understand for whom they work: for you, for the citizens, or for the state and a few large industrial groups who are their main shareholders or who are their owners. The third-party oversight principle applies to all media. All press is considered part of the education sector at an individual's adult stage. They provide public access to their financial statements to prove their independence and to establish their credibility with their audience. Article 9. All actors involved in the press, media, and more broadly public information must publish their corporate status and regulations once a year, in full transparency, accessible to all. For further detailed explanations, please refer to Chapter 4, Empire of Lies. Article 10 of the Constitution. The 10th article of the Constitution prohibits any state's interventionism in the state's monetary discipline. The state's money supply is determined according to an average of the M2 and M3 calculation method, then converted into digital currency in a blockchain technology that prevents any manipulation and inflation. That was Article 1. Additional explanation for Article 1. Inflation disappears forever. The state, with the complicity of central banks, will never again be able to steal the value of your savings via inflation without even having to send you a tax bill. The state, with the complicity of central banks, can no longer increase the money supply at will to create the money that it needs for its expenses or to save any economic actors. Article 2. The money supply is increased or decreased by plus 10% to minus 10% per year, depending on the growth or decline of the economy from which it originates. The annual growth or decline in the money supply percentage cannot be lower or higher than the percentage growth or decline of the economy from which it originates. No lower or higher than the money supply calculated according to the average of M2 and M3 calculation method. Additional explanation. The growth of the money supply is determined by the growth of the economy from which it derives its value, which supports its value. The value of the overall money supply, M2 or M3, is determined by the work of citizens, the country's infrastructures, tangible assets, but primarily by the number of individuals who trust the value of that currency, who have chosen it to use it as a vector of economic transactions and as a refuge to store the value of their work in the long term without risk of erosion. Article 3. Physical cash derived from digital currency is available to any individual and legal entity that wishes to utilize it. Additional explanation. Once again, money regains its real value. It becomes the property of the citizens, the property of the people, the property of the real economy at the service of exchanges and no longer at the service of politicians who generate inflation with the complicity of central banks to create the cash they need without the citizens' consent. access to cash in banknotes form for any individual or legal entity is a constitutional right. Article 4. Banks and financial institutions are required to convert all sums of money into tangible assets such as physical gold, physical silver, or other precious metals at market price without fees upon first request from their clients. Additional explanation. The conversion of cash into tangible assets at market price is a constitutional right because it is the only way to test the real value of money in real conditions. No one can prevent you from having proof of the real value of your savings or take a tax or a commission on the transaction. Article 5. Interest rates are free and floating, fixed at the sole discretion of lenders, credit providers, based on the actuarial calculation and the risk that they are willing to take. Lenders and credit providers are all in competition with one another. Additional explanation. There is no more inflation. Interest rates artificially controlled by central banks according to the political interests of the moment disappear. Interest rates can no longer be used by states to control you and, among other things, to steal your access to property. It is normal, logical, and fair that the interest rates applied to capital loan, whatever the amounts, whatever the reasons for the loan, are at the free discretion of the party who takes the risk of lending their money, their capital. It is up to the lender, the party who grants the credit, to make their risk exposure calculation to determine the interest rate that they are willing to grant. Interest rates are fixed by supply and demand. All lenders, professional and private, are in competition with one another to offer the best rates. The obsolete concept of central banks disappears. The state constraints that dictate their actions no longer exist. The erosion of monetary value by inflation is replaced by a new equilibrium in money supply, which results from the number of users who trust the value of the currency, free from any and all political constraints. The erosion of currency value is replaced by a balance of money valuation resulting from the stability and the money supply, confidence, and the number of its users. Article 6. Extortionate interest rates are prohibited. Any financial institution, legal entity, or individual, natural person, who exploits a borrower's weakness to apply extortionate interest rates or demands guarantees that could bankrupt the borrower loses the right to offer any financial services for a period of 5 years without the possibility of appeal. Judges and jurors are the only one authorized to decide. The third-party oversight principle applies. Additional explanation. The goal is again crime prevention, to discourage any dishonest behavior via strict sanction that simply gives employees no choice. Article 7. The adaptation of the price of goods and services to the value of money is accomplished via the free market and free competition among all the economic actors. Additional explanation. The valuation of money is determined by the number of users who trust it, therefore, by the free market, without any political constraints. The value of consumer goods adapts up and down to the value of money through straightforward competition. Article 11 of the Constitution. The 11th article of the Constitution defines the role, responsibilities, and rights of political leaders in the area of conflict management. The nation is neutral. In a crisis, the state and the nation's politicians cannot oblige the people of the nation to break this neutrality, even if the nation's politicians deem it essential to do. Only a popular vote from the sole sovereign, the people, by absolute majority with no proportionality, can allow for a temporary breach of neutrality. Article 2. The state and the nation's politicians have no authority and cannot, under any circumstances, lead the country and its citizens into an armed conflict. Only a popular vote from the sole sovereign, the people, by absolute majority with no proportionality, can allow for the nation to engage in an armed conflict, in a war. The only exception is self-defense in the event of a direct attack on the national soil by an armed force that does not respect the nation's neutrality, constitutional rules, and legal framework. The state. Article 3. The state and the nation's politicians have no authority and cannot impose economic sanctions or any interference with another sovereign nation, with a religious group, with a cultural group, with an ethnic group, or with any human gathering. Only a popular vote from the sole sovereign, the people, by absolute majority with no proportionality, can allow for this. Article 4. The state and the nation's politicians have no authority and cannot finance an armed conflict or deliver weapons intended to support an open armed conflict. Only a popular vote from the sole sovereign, the people, by absolute majority with no proportionality, can allow for this. Additional explanations. No further explanation is necessary. It is self-evident. We want good relations with our neighbors, respecting all social organizations, all ethnic groups, and all religious confessions. A person who starts a war is weak. They failed to find another solution. Any fool can win a war depending on the material resources available. You do not want weak men or fools leading the nation. The only way to win a war is to organize peace. which is the sole and unique responsibility of your leaders. It is their sole and unique mandate. If an armed conflict is necessary, the people, the sole sovereign, are the only ones that have the power to decide. Article 12 of the Constitution. The 12th article of the Constitution provides for complete public accessibility to the financial statements of the nation, all public institutions, all state-funded organizations, and all economic actors in education, health, justice, and media sectors. Article 1. Every citizen has the right to exercise their third-party oversight right to access the financial statements, the accounts, of the nation and all the legal entities in the domain of education, health, justice, and media, the press. Article 2. The state, all public institutions and state-funded organizations, and all legal entities that provide community services in the domains of education, health, justice, and media must provide full transparency and free access to their financial statement every January 31st. Article 3. Available information includes the names of the owners, the names of the shareholders, the capital value, i.e. the value of 100% of the shares at market price or estimated value when not publicly traded, the itemized value of infrastructures, the specific sources of all revenues, the specific sources of all income, excluding names of patients in the health sector, of course, the names of all donors, sponsors, and sources of financing with associated amounts, all salary expenses, all expenses related to all named service providers, the profit margins, financial reserves, and tangible assets. Article 4. Any fraud, any misrepresentation of figures intended to deceive the community and citizens, any concealment in the mandatory publication of financial statements results in the immediate dismissal of the individuals responsible for this fraud and the dismissal of the entire chain of command if they are proven to be aware of this, regardless of their function or their hierarchical rank. If it is a personal constitutional responsibility and you cannot escape it, offenders will be punished with public service work without the possibility of appeal. Additional explanation. You pay for 100% of state's expenses. So what you pay 100% for belongs to you 100%. The state belongs to you. The state belongs to the citizens. The state's accounting is your accounting. Therefore, you should have full access to all financial statements of the nation. The state's function is to defend private property and intellectual property. National order, justice, and defense automatically stem from this primary mission. Only full access to the nation's financial statements allows you to exercise your third-party oversight right, confirming or not the proper management of what belongs to you, the state. All services directly related to the common good, related to what unites us all services to the community as a whole must be absolutely transparent. It is for the people to be able to appreciate at all times whether these services fulfill their role at the service of the community. The only way to succeed is to give full and complete oversight of the people on all financial flows. Article 13. The 13th article of the Constitution defines the role, structure, and discipline that applies to the legal framework, judicial authorities, police forces, and the prison system. Article 1. The Constitution defines the structure of the legal framework, its budget, its scope, its form, its duties, its right, and its limitations. Article 2. The legal framework is derived from the Constitution. It is the expression of the constitutional will and serves as the executive organ for applying the Constitution. The legal framework, the judicial system, the police, which guarantees national security, the prison system, and the enforcement of penalties all refer to, apply, and defend the Constitution. They operate under the permanent control and authority of the constitutional articles and cannot violate or create exceptions to the application of constitutional rules. Article 3. The Constitutional Court is the supreme judicial authority of the nation. It refers only to the Constitution and the laws derived from it to enable its executive application. All citizens can appeal to the Constitutional Court without any cost if a judgment rendered by another court does not respect the Constitution. Constitutional judges have full authority. Substance always takes precedence over form. The spirit of the law and the constitutional articles always take precedence over procedure, and the principle of third-party oversight applies. Additional explanation. The Constitutional Court is the supreme authority of justice. It has full authority, and no one is above its decisions. Article 4. All judicial authorities and all individuals acting on behalf of the Constitution and the legal framework, who represent them directly or indirectly, are entirely independent from the state. They enjoy complete independence from the executive to ensure their impartiality. Additional explanation. The Constitution is the supreme authority of justice. It is the reference. It is above the law. Article 5A. All judicial authorities and all individuals acting on behalf of the Constitution and the legal framework, who represent them directly or indirectly are accountable only to the people, either directly or through the Constitution. They are not accountable to the state and do not receive direct orders from the state. They are in charge and fully responsible for the content of the Code of Article of Law, CAL, and its scope of application. 5b, Article 5b. If a member of the government or any individual employed by the state, directly or indirectly, is found guilty of exerting pressure or attempting to influence a judicial decision on one or many individuals employed directly or indirectly by the judicial authorities, they are immediately dismissed without compensation, barred for life from public service, and sentenced to 5 years of paid public service work without the possibility of appeal. Additional explanation. Judges are not the servants of political or financial interests. They are accountable to no one, and they are personally responsible for the verdicts and applicable sentences. The penalty must be sufficiently dissuasive to act as a deterrent to committing crimes. Article 6. All citizens, both individuals, natural persons, and legal entities, are absolutely equal before the law. The legal framework applies equally to everyone, without exception, regardless of economic weight, function, hierarchical rank, or responsibilities within the nation, across the entire national territory. Additional explanation. The only civilizations that function and have a future are those in which all men are equal before the law. You could add, in which all men are equal before the value of money and before taxes. Article 7. No immunity can exempt anyone, whether individuals, natural persons, or legal entities, from the application of the legal framework, which expresses the constitutional will of the people. The rules are the same for everyone. Judges have full authority. Substance always takes precedent over form. The spirit of the law always takes precedence over procedure, and the principle of third-party oversight applies. Additional explanation. No judgment can be rendered based on the jurisprudence, which no longer exists. A procedural defect cannot exempt a defendant from trial if undisputable evidence is provided. Substance always takes precedence over form. Judges are not the servants of political or financial interests. They are accountable to no one, and they are personally responsible for the verdicts and applicable sentences. The principle of third-party oversight applies. Judges are not bound by form. They judge the substance with their conscience. They are the sole masters on board. The principle of third-party oversight applies. All humans are absolutely equal before the rules that unite us, that give us and enhance our collaborative capacity, that enable the success of our desire to live together, and that guarantee of our freedoms. Our freedoms are directly derived from the respect for the legal framework. No one is above the law. The state, and politicians in particular, set the example for citizens. They are the example for us all, and they comply with the Constitution and the legal framework more than anyone else. They are the guarantors of these. They have exactly the same right and duties as the citizen, regardless of their functions. Article 8. If a law is likely to send more than 10% of the population to prison or result in fines with criminal record, or if more than 10% of citizens are already violating it at the same time of its drafting, it is unenforceable, unconstitutional, null and void, as it does not reflect the real lives of citizens. It must be reformulated and presented to the Revision Assembly of the Code of Article of Law, RACAL, after 2 years at the earliest. If deemed essential to the survival of the nation, it may be proposed to citizens for acceptance through a popular vote by universal suffrage without any proportionality. Additional explanation. The legal framework is not a sword of Damocles used by the state to oppress citizens and the people. It guides the citizen to give them a framework of behavioral rules compatible with respect for everyone's freedom, rights, and duties. A law likely to send more than 10% of the population to prison immediately is unenforceable, unconstitutional, null and void, because it does not reflect the real lives of citizens. It can be reformulated and presented again to the Revisional Assembly of the Code of Articles of Law, RACAL, after 2 years. Article 9. The legal framework and the entire judicial apparatus belongs to the citizens. They are at the service of the citizens. They belong to the people, and they serve the people. As such, the principle of third-party oversight applies whenever the judicial apparatus is invoked by parties unable to reach an agreement through mediation, or when a court renders a verdict on criminal offenses or cases. All information, absolutely everything, is publicly accessible within 4 days following the conclusion of a procedure, within 4 days following any judicial decision, any verdict, and no later than 6 months after any event relating to any ongoing case, even if the final judgment has not yet been rendered. Additional explanation. Justice belongs to you. It is a service that belongs to the people. Only third-party oversight principle permits you to ensure that it operates in your service, allows you to return their profession to judges, ensures that judicial decisions are made impartially, allows you to apply pressure in case of misuse, and helps evolve the system because you understand it. Through your third-party oversight, you become the driver and the grantor of the proper functioning of the judicial apparatus. Omerta and concealment no longer exist. All those involved in justice must be accountable for their actions and decisions. They can no longer manipulate you. You have access to everything. We are all accountable. We are all responsible. We take responsibility, and we have the whole earth as witness. Article 10. The number of articles in the Code of Articles of Law which apply to all individuals and legal entities in the nation must not exceed 440 articles, which must fit within 240 A4 pages or 640,000 characters at most. Beyond these limits, the Code of Article of Law, CAL, is unconstitutional, null and void, and must be reformulated. Additional explanation. No one is supposed to ignore the law. The accessibility of legal rules to all citizens is the absolute priority. If the Code of Articles of Law, CAL, cannot be read and understood by a 10 years old child, it does not serve the community's interest. It is unconstitutional, null and void, and must be reformulated. The Code of Articles of Law, CAL, does not legislate on details. It provides the broad outlines and the spirit of the law. Judges have full authority. Article 11. The Constitution and the Code of Articles of Law, CAL, are the only documents used by the judicial authorities to render justice. Additional explanation. Simplicity, efficiency. Everything that unites citizens in their desire to live together must be contained within these documents. They must be readable, accessible, and understandable by a child aged 7 to 10 years old, sorry. Otherwise, they do not serve the interests of the community, are unconstitutional, and must be reformulated. Article 12. Political leaders, professional associations, legal entities, and individuals may suggest new laws, but only professionals who are members of the legislative body and judicial authorities may accept them for submission to the Revision Assembly of the Code of Article of Law, RACAL, which alone can accept or reject them and present them to the citizens for acceptance through a popular vote by universal suffrage without any proportionality. Additional explanation. Only the people have the authority to accept a new law by universal suffrage without any proportionality. Article 13. For each new law accepted, an obsolete law must be eliminated to ensure the stability of the number of articles of law, the simplicity and the accessibility of the legal framework as a whole. Article 14. No one is supposed to ignore the law, and no one can afford to ignore it. No human being can live in harmony with their community if they are unaware of its rules or if its rules are inaccessible to them. The legal framework, the Code of Articles of Law, CAL, and the Constitution are mandatory school subjects from the age of 7 or at the latest by the age of 10. Additional explanation. No human, no human beings can live in harmony within their community if they are unaware of its rules, if they are inaccessible to them, if they can be manipulated, interpreted, or violated by others. Article 15. The citizen has direct access to judges at all times to protect their interests and the rule of law, which guarantees social order. As soon as a judge is called upon, as soon as the judicial apparatus is invoked, the principle of third-party oversight applies. Additional explanation. The legal framework and all judicial authorities are at the service of the citizens and the people as a whole. The citizen has direct access to judges at all times to protect their interests and the rule of law, which guarantees social order. If the citizens cannot resolve a conflict with a third party through mediation, if they wish to bring the conflict before the judicial authorities for a judgment, the judicial authorities are bound by the principle of third party oversight. All documents, the entire trial process, and the verdict will be publicly accessible. Judges are personally responsible for the verdicts and applicable sentences. They are not the servants of political or financial interests. They are accountable to no one. Their judgments are made public within 48 hours of their verdicts. The principle of third-party oversight applies. The people are fully informed and each citizen can form their own opinion. They are direct witness to the proper functioning or the misuse of the judicial system. Article 16. Judicial authorities must publish their financial statement transparently, making them available to all citizens by January 31st for the previous year. These statements include the cost of the entire judicial system, salary costs, police costs, infrastructure costs, including buildings and equipment, and on a nominative basis, the costs of all state of private service providers, the costs of the prison system and public and private enforcement bodies. If budgets are exceeded, the legal framework must be simplified, made more efficient, faster, and more effective. Annual budgets increase cannot exceed the growth percentage of the real economy of the nation. Any additional credits beyond that must be submitted to a popular vote for approval or rejection by an absolute majority without any proportionality. Additional explanation. The legal framework is the property of the people. It is a service intended for the people. It is paid for by the people, and citizens have full access to the financial statements of what belongs to them, of that for which they pay. The principle of third-party oversight applies. Article 13b. Article 13b of the Constitution defines the rules covering the revision of the Code of Article of Law. Article 1. 101 to 1001 revisionist citizens, always an odd number, are randomly selected every 2 years, 7 days before meeting in the Revision Assembly of the Code of Article of Law, RACAL, RACAL. Additional explanation. The number of revisionist citizens between 101 and 1001 can depend only on the population size. The draw is random. Article 2. The draw is random, and no one can avoid it or be represented. It is a civic duty. Only illness or disability can justify abstention and or replacement. Article 3. No one, neither political leaders nor judicial executives nor individuals, knows the identity of the selected citizens. Article 4. The revisionist citizens are summoned for 1 week, 5 to 7 days of work in a closed session to review the Code of Article of Law, CAL. They make the necessary amendments to defend the values of the Constitution and the rules that allow its executive application. Additional explanation. The time constraint, 7 days for the summons, then 5 to 7 days to review and deliberate, is essential to prevent any lobbying. Article 5. The Code of Article of Law, CAL, cannot exceed 440 articles and must fit within 240 A4 pages, or approximately 640,000 characters. A Code of Articles of Law, CAL, that exceeds 640,000 characters is unconstitutional, null, and void, and must be reformulated. Additional explanation. The Code of Articles of Law, CAL, must be understandable by 99% of the population from the age of 7 to 10 years old and must be readable in less than 4 days. No human being can live in harmony within their community if they are unaware of its rules, if they are inaccessible. Article 6. The new articles of law, their amendments or their removal are voted by the absolute majority of the 101 to 1001 revisionist citizens, always an odd number, to ensure a majority. Abstention during the vote is prohibited. No proportionality is allowed. Article 7. If the Revision Assembly of the Code of Articles of Law, RACAL, proposes to reduce freedoms or citizens' purchasing power directly or indirectly, it must submit its proposal to the judicial authorities, who will formalize the proposal for acceptance through a popular vote within 14 days following the closure of its session. The people accept or reject it by an absolute majority. No proportionality is allowed. Additional explanation. The Revision Assembly of the Code of Article of Law, RACAL, proposes what it deems just and appropriate to defend the citizens in their human, familial, environmental, constitutional, legal, political, financial, strategic, and national environment. But in the case of reduced freedoms or direct or indirect reduction of the citizens' purchasing power, only the people decide. Article 8. The articles of law accepted by the popular vote have a force of law within 14 days. Article 9. The articles of law rejected by the people can only be resubmitted at the next revision assembly of the Code of Articles of Law, RACAL. Article 10A. If a member of the government or a member of the legislative body or any individual employed by the state, directly or indirectly, is found guilty of exerting pressure on one or more revisionist citizens drawn by lot, they are immediately dismissed without compensation, barred for life from public service, and sentenced to 5 years of paid public service work without the possibility of appeal. B. Any individual found guilty directly or indirectly of violating the rules for revising the Code of Article of Law, CAL, is sentenced to 5 years of paid public service work without the possibility of appeal. Additional explanations. The penalty is not excessive because it must be sufficiently dissuasive to prevent any individual from violating the legal rules that offer the greatest number of people their quality of life. The goal is to encourage the prevention of crimes through self-regulation by applying automatic penalties to reduce the cost of legal infrastructure. The 14th constitutional article, or the 14th article of the Constitution confirms the parity of the means of action and the balance of power between the people and the state. Article 1. Citizens have the same constitutional and legal rights as the state. They obey to the same rules. Article 2. No citizen, human group, religion, political party, fraternity, association, or sector of human activity can dispose of a superior powers or dispose of powers that are unavailable to another citizen or group, regardless of their role, their function, their legal or their social structure. Article 3. In the exercise of power, the state and its employees cannot grant themselves power or immunity that are not simultaneously granted to all citizens, the people, the nation's sole sovereign. Additional explanations. The only threat to the citizens' freedom is the state. The only threat to the state comes from those in charge, the politicians. Your constitution provides a balance of means of action to prevent any human group, regardless of legitimacy, from using power, force, or weapons not available to another group. All power must know its limits, must fear losing its power if it crosses those limits, and all power must fear a counterpower that has the constitutional and legal tools to overrule it in the case of abuse or failure to respect its role with regards to the citizens. Article 4. The state and citizens are equal before the means used to resolve conflict and to conduct investigations. Special privileges are unconstitutional. Additional explanation. If the state or law enforcement has the right to film you, you also have that right. If they have the right to record your conversations, you also have that right, and so on. Article 5. When the state exercises its power of third-party oversight and requires full transparency from its citizens in any domain, it owes the same third-party oversight, the same full transparency to all citizens without any restriction. As the sovereign, the citizen has the same right to third-party oversight as the state. Additional explanation. The third-party oversight principle must be given to citizens by all those who use this third-party oversight as a mechanism in the exercise of their functions. For example, the legal framework or law enforcement must be able to exercise surveillance to conduct an investigation or to prevent crimes. After a maximum of 6 months, the results and the details of this investigation and surveillance must be made public. Law enforcement, police, and the judiciary can request a 6-month extension when an investigation is ongoing but not yet complete. Extending the deadline to 12 months before public access to all documents and procedures is granted. The only nations with a future are those in which there is a balance of power and in which there is a balance of means of action between the citizens and the state. If the sovereign, the people, do not have the same means of action as the state will impose its dictatorship. This is a long, technical, and somehow boring chapter of the whole process. So indeed, I thank you for your benevolent attention. And well, if you made it that far, wow, you're incredibly resilient. And it just means that we're going to go places together. Again, thank you very much for your kind and benevolent attention. Peace out.